Hi, this is Mike Young with Noble Warriors, and we're here for a Manhood in the Media Spotlight. And I got a really cool couple of articles that I want to weave together a couple of thoughts for us today as we look at where is manhood in the media. Well, first is one that I read about a week ago. This was posted, this was sent out from Barna on August the 23rd. There is no author listed. It's just from the resilient pastor work that Barna is doing. The title of the article is "The Pastoral Succession Crisis is Only Getting More Complicated." And so this goes on to talk about how difficult it is for pastors who are looking to transition out of ministry to find a successor so that they can have a healthy transition. Most pastors who really love their flocks, and I'm not a pastor, so I observe this, but most pastors who really love their flocks want to see a healthy transition of leadership and a succession plan so that they know the flock is well cared for. I think the challenge is that they're struggling to find replacements for themselves. As our pastoral core, the number of pastors across the country, and Barna does broad research, so this is not just one particular denomination. It's broad in context and scope, but I think some of this applies to us here. But here's one of the things that they ask two questions or make two statements and ask pastors to respond. And so here's one. I am concerned about the quality of future Christian leaders. And in 2022, so this is last year, let me see, it was 71% of pastors either agreed somewhat or agreed strongly that they were concerned about the quality of future Christian leaders. But the bigger question, the bigger statement that we saw a huge jump on was this statement. So listen to this statement. It is becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. So then the people who were surveyed, pastors who were surveyed, could agree strongly, agree somewhat, disagree strongly, or say they don't know. And in 2015, 69% of pastors who were surveyed either agreed strongly or agreed somewhat that it was becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. Well, 2022, that percentage jumps from 69%, we're talking about 7 years, jumps from 69% to 75%. So an increase here in 6% of pastors who either agree somewhat or agree strongly that it is becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. So here's Mike Young's men's ministry guys' thoughtful, off-the-cuff reactions to this particular bit of information. And the article goes on, we'll link to it. Number one, I find it interesting that the term that they used is find. Here's the statement again. It's becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. Now, I chuckled to myself when I came up with this next statement, but we use find like we're looking for them like spiritual Sasquatches out there, like they're hiding in caves or behind trees or something. And so I don't think you're just going to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. Surely God raises up and calls these people, but I think, I believe, I see biblically that those young folks are invested in, they are discipled, they're walked alongside of, and I don't think they're just found, I think they are developed. And so there's huge debate over whether leadership is learned or innate, but here's the deal. We have to disciple mature, capable young believers to the point of their preparation for ministry. I don't think they just show up. Number two, here's an interesting thing it's a little bit potentially controversial, but I think if you were to say it's harder to find mature Christian young men who want to be pastors, that's definitely truth. I think it's also, if you put young women, it's harder to find mature young Christian women who want to become pastors. I think we've got quite a few women out there who are trained and they have been developed for leadership and they've been invested in. Let's face it, folks, you know this. If you're listening to this, you probably pay attention to the fact that our women's discipleship initiatives in the local churches are much more robust than our men's discipleship initiatives. And so I think we probably have more women who feel ready to lead, equipped to lead, and want to lead than we do young men. And that's something we've got to look at. And then, so that brings me to my next thought is that Jesus and Paul prioritized leadership development. And so we have abandoned, it seems, often the idea of investing very strategically in lay leadership for men. And we've kind of missed that. We do men's ministry in the local church is activity driven. It keeps guys busy, but it's not necessarily moving them toward maturity and discipling them for leadership either in the home or the church. So I think we've got some work to do here. Now there's a follow-up question in this Barna study that folks could respond to. My church puts a significant priority on training and developing the next generation of church leaders. Now, in 2015, let's see, 69%, we're back to that same number, agreed that their church was putting a significant priority on training and developing the next generation of church leaders. Would you believe this? In 2022, that number dropped to 45%. So a significant drop in folks who agreed that their church was putting significant attention on developing young church leaders. So I believe we've got some work to do, and I believe this is a men's discipleship issue. That's why I'm bringing it to you. I think this is where we see manhood in the media. Now I want to compare this to an article that came out from Tom Rainer just a few days ago, and it's also about leadership succession, finding the next generation of leaders, and how do you prepare them? And so here are 5 points. The caveat for any solution to fill leadership voids is that it does not happen overnight. So even that statement kind of counteracts this whole idea that we're going to find the mature young Christians who want to be pastors. No, this doesn't happen quickly. These folks have to be developed. But we're working with a number of church leaders who are beginning to see success in finding the right kinds of leaders. Here are 5 of their most common approaches. And so this is what Rainer and his group are saying. Pastors who are, they say, having success in finding the right kinds of leaders. So they're developing these leaders. Number 1, every pastor should be mentoring 2 or 3 people at all times. Guys, if you're listening to this and you're a pastor, I think you need to ask yourself the question, actually every guy who's listening to this, who am I investing in? Who am I pouring myself into on a regular, routine basis? I love to invest in young men. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you this. Here's another freebie. I'll chase a rabbit for a moment. It troubles me to go to the funerals of older men and there's nothing but old men in the congregation when the guy's funeral is taking place. You know, I want to live my life in such a way and invest my life in such a way that when I pass away, I am hopeful that wherever the funeral takes place, the room would be filled with young men who come up to my wife and my sons and my daughter and say, your dad poured into my life. I want to live that way. I want to live as a man who takes what God's given me and turns around and gives it to some other young men. It's not going to be perfect. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make mistakes. Heck, I even need to tell them about my mistakes. But I want to live in such a way that young men will come and say, this guy poured his life into my life, and it made a difference in my marriage, in my leadership, in my fathering, in my work. And so, guys, we can all live that way. Every man, even if you're not a pastor, you should be mentoring. Pray for God to provide leaders. We need to be prayerful that God will call those leaders up and expose them, and we'll be able to identify them. I just love the fact that Jesus chose, when those disciples were selected, he had prayed for them overnight. He prayed before he selected those men, and they were not the same guys that the Pharisees would have chosen. These were not learned men. These were not scholars. As a matter of fact, we learn in Acts 4:15, Acts 3:15, when Peter and John came to the temple, the Pharisees said they recognized that these were unschooled, ordinary men, but they had been with Jesus. And so that's what we want to do. We want to take some regular guys and get them close to Jesus and see him transform them and turn them into leaders. Number 3, ask all of your leaders to mentor others. That's just kind of what I covered. Every one of us should be pouring ourselves into the lives of some other men at some way. Even, my sons can invest in they're in college and just out of college, so they can invest in younger men. A high school student can invest in middle school students. Cast vision in your church for being a place where discipleship, intergenerational discipleship takes place. Mentoring takes place as we're developing leaders. Evangelism should be closely tied to mentoring. Folks, I just read a book written in the 1650s by Richard Baxter called The Reformed Pastor, and he talks about meeting with people and making sure that they were saved. And so we need to invest our lives in folks, but we need to be courageous to make sure that they can say, Jesus is Lord of my life. I have no hope for salvation, no hope for eternity in heaven with God, the creator of the universe, except for the finished work of Jesus Christ on that cross. I can't be good enough. I can't do enough. As a matter of fact, I've done lots of bad things in my life, and the only hope that I have is in Jesus Christ. And so we need to make sure that people are saved. And even in our mentoring and discipleship, we need to make sure that we are evangelizing. Now, I will go the other way too. Patrick Morley, who wrote the Man in the Mirror, says that evangelism without discipleship is cruel. And I got to tell you, I'm just not a huge fan of, show up and blow up and skip out the back door sort of evangelism where you're taking names and putting nicks in your gun belt or whatever. Guys, if we're going to have a plan to evangelize, we need to have a plan to disciple and move people to maturity. And so we need to work on that. And then don't fill a leadership void with unqualified leaders. Guys, one of the things that I see all over the place is that we end up, because we have a office to fill, position to fill often in the local church, we'll just take whoever has a warm breath and is willing to show up, and we will put them there. And so we often end up with unqualified leaders leading in various places in the church. And so Tom Rainer's recommendation here is to not do that. Leave a void rather than put an unqualified person into a leadership position. But here's the deal. If you don't have any qualified folks, the best thing that you can do is start to invest in seeing people become qualified. And I would say use 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 as your benchmarks. Go to 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 and develop a strategy to raise up and disciple men to meet those qualifications. Not all of them will become elders or deacons in the local church, but if you could use that as your syllabus to develop men, as your curriculum, if you will, if you begin to raise men up to those standards, then you should never run out of leaders for your church. Your family should be stronger, your marriages should be healthier, and your church should be stronger, and you should have qualified leaders to step in. So I believe that's a biblical plan, and this is a place where we see manhood in the media, because I believe the church is doing a lot of activities for men, but not truly investing in developing them for leadership. And we're seeing the results of that now. So let's change the tide of that. So let's invest in some other men. Who will you invest in next? God bless you, men. Thanks for joining us for Manhood in the Media Spotlight. We'll be back with another one soon. Make sure you check out the show notes to find links to these articles and books that we mentioned during the show.